Way back in the early 90s, Sega would start to produce collections or bundles of some of the most memorable games that would begin life on the Mega Drive, when you would see the likes of the Mega Games collection with Mega Games 1, 2 and 3 packaging together some of the most iconic games of that generation, with most cases seeing most players being introduced to some of the greatest genres and gaming series ever in existence, that would often be packaged along with consoles as part of a complete bundle to give players more options and unique experience to love, share and enjoy. And while the Mega Drive was highly successful, not everybody had access to the console, but for those that didn't have access to it, the majority of us did have access or did own a Sega Master System. And in all honesty, it was the best alternative to the Mega Drive, as it did also house some great games. So during the mid-90s, we'd also see the inclusion of the Master Games 1 collection to give Master System owners a taste of what the Mega Drive players were getting with those iconic bundles, which would provide 3 games from different types of genres that would all appeal to different game types or players, ranging from sports, racing and puzzle, with 2 of the games in question also receiving ports of their own on different versions of the Mega Games collection seen on the Mega Drive also. So here we are going to look at the games on this collection and what they offer for the player and how they will be able to use this game set to grow their collection, but I'll even share my experiences of owning the games on this list growing up and how they presented some great memories from owning the console over the years. So let's dive in. World Soccer, otherwise known as Great Soccer, was released for the Sega Master System in 1987. That would go under many different rebranded names, with Super Football or Sports Pad Football in the years that followed, with the Sports Pad Soccer game being bundled with the Sega Sports Pad peripheral in Japan only. And the game would give you access to 8 different teams that you could play as from Argentina, West Germany, France, Brazil, United Kingdom, Italy, United States and Japan, where you play in single games or events in order to obviously win the tournament. You could say the World Cup in all regards. Now there isn't a tournament as such, it's literally just game by game and you'll win something at the end. Now you can play the game with 2-player multiplayer support, so you can play a normal game of football or you can even just play and have fun just with penalties. Again, will either be single player or 2-player, and it's a fun little game. Tricky to get into at the start, but when you get familiar with it, it's not too difficult. In fairness, you won't be long being able to knock the goals in for fun. The only thing is, when you do start shooting, it's very hard to dribble the ball around players, because as soon as an opposing player is within your vicinity, you're guaranteed to have the ball taken off you, so you will have to keep trying to take the ball back of them. But the advantage that you do have, in fairness to the game, is that you don't have to press any buttons in order to do slide tackles. Once the player is close to whoever has the ball, they'll automatically keep tackling the player until they get the ball off them. So it'll be up to you to hit the second button on the controller in order to cross the ball or to chip it in the air, and then the first button will be usually to shoot, and that's the button essentially you'll be using the most in the game. But where this game really benefits is from its multiplayer aspects. If you have a second controller to hand, you will definitely have a good bit of fun with this game, especially with your mates. And even playing the normal game, the penalties are really good. Now playing single player can be tricky because the computer AI is very challenging, because they can nearly almost anticipate your exact move, especially when you're playing with stronger teams against France, Argentina, Brazil. No sooner have you pressed the button to go and kick the ball in a certain direction, the computer instantly knows where you're going to go, so they send the keeper in that direction, and very seldom will you ever score a goal. You'll have to play against some of the weaker teams to really have a chance of winning the penalty shootouts. Now it depends on the regions. I found that where I'm from in Ireland, we had the variant of World Soccer, and I found that wasn't as difficult, but when you play the Great Soccer alternative from the US, that definitely is a lot more challenging aspect, especially regarding the penalties. It must have been tweaked for the other regions to make it a wee bit easier. But still, aside from that, like I said, the best way to play this game is to grab a second controller and to play it with your mates. And with this game being packaged as part of the Master Games 1 collection, it does add great multiplayer appeal to your collection, in fairness. Even for myself personally, when I first played this game, we got it as part of the Master Games 1 collection together with the Master System console that we got, that had Sonic the Hedgehog built into the console, and we got another controller bundle with it. And because I had 4 younger brothers, it was a great way to get stuck in and just have a blast with the bros, if you will. Mind you, we weren't good losers, nor were we good winners, so it took a long time to get familiar with the game. But it's great in short bursts. Obviously now as time has gone on and you've gone back to play these games, you can see the simplicity simplicity behind them. And it is what it is. It's an overly simplistic but yet tricky game at times. But it is fun. In fairness to it, it really is. But again, it just appeals to that dynamic. It's a game that's really good in short bursts. But for me, the penalties is definitely the best aspect. And again, the multiplayer aspect really comes into play here, because that's probably the best mode to play against your mates, because you can really outthink your opponents. Because you can hit the ball in a variety of different directions, and sometimes you might be thinking that you've actually saved it when you haven't, and vice versa. So it's, yeah, there's a lot of challenge that lies in store, and you can really challenge your mates to see who's the best between you. But all in all, it's a fun game that's added to this collection. It's a worthwhile addition to this collection, in fairness, and just adds a different dynamic. Very like the Mega Games 1 collection seen on the Sega Mega Drive, where you had a mixture of sports, puzzle and racing. This is trying to go for the same type of idea. Now, there are many other football games that could have been added on this list, but in fairness, this one does a good job. It is what it is at the end of the day. Super Monaco GP, or Super Monaco Grand Prix as it's mainly known, was originally released by Sega as an arcade game in 1989 and would later be ported to a multitude of different consoles along with the Sega Mega Drive and even with the Sega Master System. Now, there are many differences regarding each of the versions to get them to run on their subsequent systems, but they all present a challenge and they all present something different to each other in regard. Now, the ports for the 8-bit systems did range in quality and overall general reviews, with some being seen as favourable while others being seen as lesser quality. But if you wanted an authentic Formula 1 experience, it would have been one of the best that you would have had on the system that was available to you at the time. And in fairness, even the Master System version, when you look at all of the other versions that were reviewed over the years, the game did get fairly decent reviews across the board. Now, the game, when you play it, it has a 2-player mode, but the game is always in split screen. Even when you're playing on the single player mode, your general play of view is always on the top screen, and your rival or the second player, if you're playing 2-player mode, is always on the bottom screen. Now, it can be a bit off-putting to some, and you don't often see this in the other games or the other counterparts, especially on 16-bit consoles. This isn't the case, but it's definitely more present here. It's not to say that it's a bad thing, it's something that you just might have to take a bit of time to get used to. But the game is challenging. You can play like through practice modes, test runs, but you will play mainly through the championship that will see you race around a variety of different tracks from all different locations around the world, anything from Brazil, San Marino, Italy, Brazil, and let's just say, like the Mega Drive edition, very very tough to win races. It has a similar format in terms of the gameplay mechanics and how you set up your car for each race, that depending on the different transmission settings you can either choose from automatic or like 3 or 4 speed or 7 speed gears. And you can also utilise different engines from V8s to V10s and V12s, and each have their own power outputs that can vary in quality depending on how you want to approach the race, as some will be a lot slower overall compared to others, but even your tyre choices can also have an effect on your overall racing and grip through each stage. The one thing I will say is that I found over the years from playing the game is, regardless of the tyre choices, because you have to drift a lot around the corners and the car does a lot of skids and you can see it visibly on the screen, if you hold on to the direction button for any length and period of time or for too long, which honestly isn't long, for more than a second or two, the car will naturally go into a spin. So what you have to do is literally just let off the direction button every second, let it skid for a little bit, let it off, let it skid, and then let it off again, and that will kind of maintain the drift going around the corner. But if you hold on to it for too long, you're guaranteed to spin. But even at that, when you try to slow down around corners, regardless of whether you're trying to drift or kind of like slow down. Sometimes you can't slow down enough and you will always go off the track, either into the grass or you'll hit one of the barriers that always appear at the side, so it will slow you down. But your opponents on screen, even though you can gain places in the races in the championship, you'll always have one rival or one opponent that would usually be your second player in the 2-player mode, but will be your rival in the single player mode, and it's very, very difficult to beat them, because yes, they'll make mistakes too and give you an opportunity to get back into it, but you have to be mindful of your surroundings when you're racing, because if not, if they get so far ahead of you, sometimes you just will not catch them, no matter how good of a race that you have. So there's pros and cons to it. It's a type of game that isn't for everybody. It probably isn't the best experience in all respects, but it is, in all honesty, a fairly decent and solid racer on the Master System. And if you want a Formula 1 experience, it probably is one of the better ones out there. While there is better Formula 1 games on the console, for the early days or months or years of the console's lifespan, it would have been one of the better games seen on it. And the fact is that it has multiplayer elements. I think that's where it will have the best benefit, because if you have a second controller and you can play with either family members or your mates, I think that's where you'll get the best experience from it. That's what I found when we had the game years ago, because my first experience with the game was part of the Master Games 1 collection that we got when we got the console in 1993, and that's where we got the most fun out of it, because the races themselves can be quite long and they can be quite repetitive, and if you don't have great patience for this type of game, you will find it to be a struggle and a slog and just a long grind. So I found the best way to enjoy it was to play it with my brothers or just stay with your mates. Mind you, we were never very good, but as long as you were able to get over the line, it didn't matter what position, as long as you beat the other person, you didn't care. And I think that was the fun of it, or that is where we got the most fun out of it, in fairness. But overall, it's not too bad of a title. It's a solid experience for the Master System, and it is a worthy collection on this list. Very like the Mega Games 1 edition on the Mega Drive, where you had a mixture of puzzle, racing and sports. This tries to go for the same thing here, and all 3 games that are provided on this list do what they set out to do. They do provide a unique experience, and for all intents and purposes, they are better to be played in short bursts, but they are fun for what they offer. It just depends on what you make of it, but I would give them a try, in all honesty. Columns would be a puzzle game added to the Sega Master System in late 1989 and early 1990, and would be a port of the Mega Drive edition that would be released earlier in 1989, that would come off of the success of Tetris from the Nintendo console seen during the 80s, where your goal is to match different rows of coloured blocks or diamonds to make them disappear in order to eliminate everything on screen, but also to increase your overall score. So the more combinations of blocks that you can destroy a minimum of 3 that are either in a row or in a diagonal formation, but you can also increase that by adding more blocks that you can build up massive combinations over time. The game does increase in speed and difficulty the further into it that you get, so you have to have your wits about you and you have to have good reaction skills in order to change out the blocks that you want, in order to build any sort of connection possible, in order to eliminate the blocks that are on screen, which is no easy task. And with the Master System port, which would have been part of the Master Games 1 collection also, was a good addition to that series, because it presented something that complemented the other games with both racing and even soccer. So if you wanted to play something that was a bit more slower paced but that presented equally as much of a challenge, and Columns was definitely the best bet, and it was a lot better than you might think. Columns was also the first pack-in game that was released on the Sega Game Gear upon its inception, so that'll give you an idea how popular this series of games was back then, because again, Columns was also released as part of the Mega Games 1 collection on the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive console. So you have 2 different modes that are available. You have the original mode, and you also have like a flash mode where you have a different type of background that goes on behind the scenes. With the flash mode, you see like flashing blocks, and they give you the ability to, if you can build up combinations, that you'll get more points overall. Plus you can actually complete that game if you can eliminate all of the blocks on the screen, whereas with the original game you just keep going until it's game over, until you've got the highest score. And the funny thing is about it is that many regard the 8-bit edition to be equally as good, if not better, than the 16-bit counterpart, which in many cases is hard to believe, but it has been said that it's equally as addictive. And I can agree with that to some point, because having owned the game as part of the collection, as I said, we got a package with the Master System, and with having a second controller you were able to play it in 2-player mode as well, so that you could compete for the highest score. Now I didn't play this game as much compared to some of my brothers and even my dad. My dad played this game like crazy. Between this and Sonic the Hedgehog, they were his two favourite games, because they were the games that he was able to always get the highest scores, and I couldn't beat the scores no matter how hard I tried. And I would play the game equally as much, but he was just always better at it. But over time, and having gone back to revisit many of these games over the years, you learn to develop a newfound respect for them, and you realise that they were a lot better than you would have thought, and they're very addictive. Even if you've seen the previous video that I mentioned where I looked at the Mega Games 1 collection on the Mega Drive, I was playing Columns again and I found it to be equally as addictive. It's funny, when you just give yourself time to sit down and play these games and think of them with an open mind, they're a lot better than you would think, and you really do get into them. But they are tough, but that's what you want. You want a challenge at the end of the day. They're simple enough to begin with to get started, but then when you want a challenge it quickly ramps up, so it has the best of both worlds involved. Now it's a game that will appeal to some, it won't appeal to everybody, but if you do genuinely like puzzle games, Columns on the Master System is one of the best puzzle experiences that you can have on the console, and it definitely does complement the games selected on this list. The games presented here in this Master Games 1 collection do offer a varying mix of different gameplay styles from different genres that will appeal to many different types of players. Whether you like sports, racing or puzzles, there is something here for everybody, in fairness. Now they may not be the best titles seen on the Master System, but they were a great addition to anyone's collection, especially if you were into collecting games at the time, or if you didn't have a great selection of games to begin with. This would have been great to have in that collection altogether, as it would have given you more options and choices to play. With that being said, I have also shared my stories of the games here because I owned this collection myself growing up, and they do present some really great memories going back that would also set the stage for everything that would come after it, with some great multiplayer features, great challenges and yet frustrating moments. But still, I wouldn't change anything. It was a great collection to have, and it was a great addition really to build our Master System collection over the years. And for those that didn't have a Mega Drive and that owned a Master System console, this was worthy of anyone's collection, in fairness. But aside from that, this was the only Master Games collection that was released on Sega's 8-bit console, and it would be interesting to understand why they never released any future bundles, because the catalogue of games that were available on the console was vast, far and wide, with many distinctive titles, even some lesser known entries that many of us wouldn't have known about that could have been added, that would have brought new eyes and even more experiences to the masses of fans of the 8-bit system. But I suppose we'll never know. But still, I think Sega could have capitalised on this by adding more of these bundles, as it would have helped to sell more consoles, I think. But I suppose at the time, looking back, more and more people were transitioning to 16-bit consoles. But still, they had their place. It was a great addition to the Master System collection, and worthy of any player's collection in all fairness, as they did present some really fun times, great memories and challenging experiences overall. But these aren't the only games that present all of those elements. Sega have produced many interesting, challenging, frustrating and quirky games over all of the consoles that have been seen over the years, which we will look at in this next video, where we will look even further into the long vast history and catalogue of some of Sega's most classic and influential titles.